Welcome to the Unearthed Man podcast, the journey becoming a conscious man. Hey all, Stephen here, and welcome to episode 64 of the Unearthed Man podcast. Now, how great was Jamie last week and his willingness to talk about his journey from drug addiction to a sound healer? I've had the privilege of being in a men's circle facilitated by Jamie, and it was an absolute beautiful space. Now, over time, I've actually become more and more fascinated by snakes, and there's always been something about them I've been attracted to. For me, they are fascinating reptiles, and for me, much maligned. For many, they are a symbol of fear, which sadly can result in them being killed for no good reason. Now, my recent guest, Anthony Haywood from Malungi Carvings, completed a carving in a wooden necklace and a boomerang of a snake. And as soon as I saw it, I knew I had to buy it. There was something deeply spiritual about those wood carvings. And just so you know, the rainbow serpent dreaming in Aboriginal society is often depicted by a snake. It represents one of nature and spirit's great and powerful forces. Connected to water, the rainbow serpent is the great life giver and protector of water, which is its spiritual home. So on this note, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this unceded land on which we reside and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Now, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Surf Coast Wellness Rooms, based in Torquay, Victoria, down here in Australia. As men, we don't spend much time, or we spend most of our time looking after everyone else and not as much time looking after ourselves. So it's time to get yourself a little bit of self-care. So if you use the code, the Unearthed Man 10 when booking, you'll receive a 10% discount on any of their services, including float tanks, infrared saunas, massages, and salt therapy. So it's great to use before or after a day at the beach. So grab your family, head down the beach, and give yourself a bit of self-care. Couple of things to run through before we kick off with today's guest, which I'm really excited to have this conversation with. First, the Unearthed Man community, of which Unearthed Man community is actually now really grown. So we got about 50 plus members in the community. It's fully supported online and it continues to grow. So if you are a man that's looking for a tribe or a community and you just want to feel supported, then definitely reach out and let me know. I'm happy to add you into the community and have you come along with the other men. Secondly, please subscribe to the podcast via your preferred app and leave a review. The quickest way to enable the podcast to become more accessible worldwide is to receive a 5-star review. And by doing this, you also acknowledge and thank my guests for their time, effort, and wisdom. And finally, if you are a man struggling with the daily grind, have constant feelings of guilt, shame, or anxiety, feeling irritated or frustrated and just lost track of who you are, and you have that deep inner sense that there's just got to be more to life than this, then expressions of interest for my 8-week men's program is now open. Now, as I've said before, I only take 10 men into each of my 8-week programs. So if you are interested, there's a link in the notes below where you can join the wait list. You and I can get on a call and we can have a bit of a chat about, your suitability and what that looks like. Now, on to today's episode. My guest today is an author and host of the podcast Project Mindfully Outdoors. He's also an avid sportsman who finds his soloist within the wilderness. Whether he finds himself in the deer works or a riverbank, the connection with Mother Nature is his driving force behind the adventure. Following a failed suicide attempt and many months of homelessness in the wake of significant life-changing events, he began a journey of self-discovery, during which he began confronting the obstacles within his mental health. This path led him to take up the cause of ending the silent suffering that comes with depression and anxiety. Through his work, he has self-published many articles relating to mental health and self-growth through the outdoors. In 2021, he started the Project Mindfully Outdoors podcast, a show that documents his journey and how he taps into the unique skill set he had developed during his life to enable him to begin to work through the depression and anxiety struggles that had plagued his life. By leaning into the concepts behind the North American wildlife conservation model, he found inspiration to meet his challenge and rebuild his life. Once he learned to combine the two major ideas that make up his model, conservation and stewardship, with finding a deeper connection with the wilderness, he found an internal power to take back control of his life. Now, I had the absolute privilege and honor to be a guest on the Project Mindfully Outdoors podcast in late May last year. Now, I have learned to be comfortable in listening to myself as a guest, as it enables me to learn how to be more succinct with my messaging. What blew me away before I started to listen to the episode was the warmth with which my guest introduced me. I remember tears falling down my cheeks as I had never heard anyone talk about me with this level of warmth and regard. This is a testament to the deepness of my guest's heart and his newfound purpose in life. So welcome to the Unearthed Man podcast, Mike Martin. Hey, Mike, how are you?
You know what? I'm doing great after that. I mean, that was a amazing introduction. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I will go back on, we had a conversation. It might have been March or April. The podcast, that I was on came out in May. And I jumped on and I was driving somewhere and I thought I'm going to jump on and have a listen. This is the way that you spoke about me. And as a man, it's hard for us to receive when another man actually, talks to them as you did, so warmth and with so much warmth and friendliness. And yeah, it really took me back, and it actually sort of really dropped deep into my heart about how beautiful it was that you took that much time and effort to acknowledge who I was and what we're doing. And, I was so happy when you agreed to come back on this podcast because I want to be able to return that favor so people can see what a warm and beautiful man that you are.
I appreciate that. And when we had that conversation, it was one of those things that, in the moment, as it flows, it kind of sets in and you don't realize until afterward, maybe a day or two, you're like, man, that really impacted me. And I wanted that to really come through in that introduction to that episode. The way that, bouncing ideas back and forth really had an effect on me. You really kind of caused me to think and apply some steps to the journey that I don't know if I would have encountered at the same time. In fact, I really want to thank you for taking the time to be on, because that did actually propel me to take some major steps with the project overall. So thank you.
Yeah, no, look, it's absolutely my pleasure. And I really enjoyed being on it. It's interesting as a podcast host that you are and myself. The one thing I find is the more guests I have on, it's interesting as to how much of this actually becomes our own therapy sessions, because we as a host, I learn so much from my guests, and there's always every week a nugget of gold that comes out. I go, oh, I never thought of it that way. Oh, I just realized that that's what I was thinking. Oh, I could actually go down a different path. And for me, it becomes hugely powerful exercise that we get to have these conversations because we get to learn all the time off these conversations.
But then it's really cool to be able to not only realize that part, but look back and kind of listen to where you've been as opposed to where you're at the moment. And the thing outside of the fact I'm sitting in a deer blind recording this conversation, being an avid conversation starter, the other one that I share with a lot of my guests is the fact that I just started doing the interviews to deal with my social anxiety, my phobia of interacting with people. And, to get back to that point about how originally my show started as kind of like a documentation of my journey, I led myself to a stage where, because of that work and the feedback that I was getting, I built up the confidence to find the ultimate form of redemption, which was to go back and reunite with my long estranged daughter. And because that power grew based on what I was doing and the feedback I was getting, I felt like bringing other people into it, holding my own feet to the fire, and really working on that was kind of like a fitting tribute to where the podcast had brought me. And then, to get back to when you talk about, or you talk to these different people and you have these different conversations, you get this nugget of wisdom from each one. It's something that I have found to be very powerful and uplifting. They are essentially individual little therapy sessions that they really help not only us as the host, but they help somebody out there in the world, whether we hear about it or not.
Yeah, you're so spot on that. There's a couple of little things in that, which is, the mantra of this podcast is the right message will hit the right person at the right time. And you're right. I don't know who that person will be. but somewhere out there, someone will pick up on this conversation, and there might be people more aligned to the conversation I have with you than with others. Yeah, and to pick up on your social anxiety point, when I was first starting the podcast, I was in a coaching program with a couple of other guys, and we had a man come on by the name of Jetty Azuma. And it was about what's our mission and what we want to do. And at that point in time, I was going to just do 13 episodes over 26 weeks. And he really stretched me, and he's like, well, why are you going to do that? And my thing was, why would any man want to come and jump on and have a conversation with me? You know, that was my own fears and my own piece, that if I would reach out to a guy and say, hey, do you want to jump on and let's do this podcast? That, you know, that wouldn't happen. Interestingly, you know, as we said, this is episode 65 or 64, I think. I lose track already. 64. I've now had 50 plus men that have been more than willing to jump out and have a conversation, and a list of other men that said, I'd love to come and be a guest on your podcast. And so that social anxiety thing is an interesting area for us to explore, about how much of that is just our own internal items about where we're seeing ourselves at any point in time versus how others may actually see us.
It is. And, you know, I think about, even now, I still struggle with it at times, is that narrative that we like to tell ourselves, like, man, this story that I'm living, nobody's going to care. Who wants to come on this show? Well, the reality of it is important. It is a chapter within the human experience. And, you know, as you talk about building tribes, this is what we are programmed to do. You know, we're programmed to survive individually, but we're programmed to learn from other people. We're drawn to connections. Those connections, they feel safe and they push us. They become kind of like that. They become kind of like the motor that moves the wheel. And you got to lean into it sometimes. It can be scary. The social anxiety definitely don't help with the narrative that you tell yourself in the beginning. But if you break it down and stop looking at that big picture or whatever the fear is telling you, you lean into it and you take a small piece. You say, you know, with a podcast, for example, I'm going to set this interview up. It's going to be 45 minutes. I'm going to talk to one person and I'm going to survive it. And then when you hang up the call and you're like, I survived. And not only that, but my tongue didn't fall out of my mouth. I got through the conversation. I feel good. I'm going to do it again.
Mm.
And that's where that momentum starts. And that's something I've discovered, is this process of dealing with social anxiety. It doesn't have to hold you back. If you learn to embrace these different things that you struggle with and make them a part of your story, when you look back at, you know, the trailhead, when you're standing at mile marker numbers 157, man, it feels good to be there.
Yep. No, I definitely agree. It's an interesting. I've been listening a lot to David Goggins recently. You know, so I go through different waves of who I listen to, and one of the things that he talks into is that we're often told to double and triple down on our strengths because that's where we're going to focus and that's where we've got to be. And his interesting message was, if someone took all that away from you, what have you got? So how about you double and triple down on your weaknesses? So if we know that we have a fear or weakness that might be in social anxiety or reaching out and having a conversation with a man or a woman or someone else, how about we lean into that space? Because the more that we can actually lean in and triple down on what could be a weakness, ultimately may end up becoming one of our truest strengths that we've had. And it may be the one thing that can actually lift us and move us forward. I mean, you've done, I think when I had a look, 277 odd, but probably getting near 300 odd episodes of a podcast. So, you know, for a man who is talking about the social anxiety, like, you're absolutely smashing it out there, and you're doubling down on that one weakness that you, as you said, you spoke into. And I just think that's absolutely awesome, because there's action behind the conversation. And I think that's the key for me, which is like, how do we get men to put the action into the conversation and actually move forward on that basis?
It all comes down to that simple little idea of putting one foot in front of the other. Or as, who was it, Dory and Finding Nemo, just keep swimming. My kids love that movie, and and it just popped into my head. But I mean, it is crazy, and as much as it makes somebody laugh, you find that one little thing and you lean into it. And when you go on these explorations of self-discovery or self-growth, self-healing, you come to find out that the tripping blocks, the stones that you're tripping over, are literally just that. And behind there is something else. Behind that is something else. And I feel like it's the things that you can't see that truly scare us, and they stop us dead in our tracks before we even start to face that first little hurdle.
Mm.
Because as I've come to discover with the social anxiety, it's more of that kind of like first stone. Behind that is something that I never wanted to accept, was that I had this issue with self-worth. And when I started to understand that and say, hey, maybe that is kind of like the place I should set my vision, I realized, a lot of the bad choices that led me to sitting in my truck, homeless, staring in the rearview mirror, going, something's off. This isn't the right path for me. Or even the fact that I can talk about that ultimate form of redemption in my life. The fact that I had to go back and find my daughter to reconnect with her and missed out on all those years was because I had no self-worth. I had no value for myself. I had to go and find that somewhere else. And I took whatever somebody threw at me. And when I realized that staring in that rearview mirror is what led me to that moment, it gave me a direction. I could start blazing a path. And, going back to the social anxiety aspect of it, the practicing that, I started to be able to tap into other people's experiences and other people's wisdom and apply that to my life in a way, in a context that would help me. And as I've done that, and I've started to build that momentum, that carrying capacity within, and that steward and that conservationist, they all came together as one. And ultimately, they started to build and protect what's internal, which started to bring my value internally that I never thought was there, outward. And now I'm standing in a position where I have a worth, I have a value that nobody can take away from me. And it just takes that one experience. There's a Lakota story that I've heard that I really like, is a great example of this. And I don't know it verbatim, so I'm going to try to kind of context a little bit. But there was this man, this child named, what was his name? Isnell. And he was born, he grew up, and throughout his life, he was just there. He was just average. Really had no, none of the war tribes brought him in, anything like that. And fact is, he got older. His mother was kind of concerned that he would never win a bride. Eventually, he did, and they had a daughter who became much more outspoken and like the center of attention and everything that Isno wasn't. He kind of thought that was his purpose, but inside he felt very alone. And being alone, it led him out to the woods. He spent more time hunting and, just hiking and doing his thing. And he came back from one of those hunts one day, and all the men were off on a war adventure or hunting or whatever. So the village was pretty empty except for some old men, some young boys, and then of course the women and children. And they got word that another war party was coming to raid their camp. So there they are, defenseless. And they got together and had a meeting about what to do. And Isnell knew at this point about a bluff that was very hard to get to. And so he led them there. He was the only one that knew the trail because he had spent so much time out there. And they traveled as fast as the slowest horse could move. Eventually they got up the bluff and the rival war party found them, but they couldn't reach them, so they were safe. And eventually they gave up. And ultimately he was embraced for having that purpose of being able to lead and protect. And they gave him the new name, Good Trail. And that's something a lot of us forget about, is that we had that underlining purpose. But going through these journeys, these adventures, and exploring ourselves is where we build that skill to, when time comes on and our number's called, we have the strength and confidence to say, hey, I can tackle this. I can do this.
I love that. I definitely love that story. And it's so powerful I often hear the people saying, sometimes, if only I knew this earlier, if only I had started this, whatever it was. But the reality is that was never meant to be for you earlier. It was never meant to be there. You, as you just said with this now, he had to go through that process. He had to go out and become a solo hunter, had to go out and find these trails, and had to go out to do that. And out of having gone through that and probably feeling the pain of going through that, he would not have been able to then lead, the rest of the tribe into a safe location. And I think that's exactly, where we got to understand that all of us are on a path and a journey, and we can't compare one path to another path, or a one warrior to another warrior, or a warrior to a solo huntsman, or what happens to be, because they're all out there doing what they're meant to be doing, and their true purpose will come out at a point in time. And it's just allowing that space for that discovery to happen. So yeah, thanks. I think that's a really powerful share. Definitely. I do want to double back a little bit, because this is a bit about people's journey. So you did touch on that you've ended up, part of that reflection was sitting in a car, in your truck, homeless, looking in the rear vision mirror. Are you in a position to talk into what led up to that point in time and what was going on in your life? Because that's a pretty key moment in your life to get to, basically homeless, which, and as you said, you obviously had a family, had a daughter, and everything else. So
Right.
do you mind leaning into that and chatting about that?
That would have been the conclusion of my second marriage.
Right.
And all finding out within that same day. So that was the very first night that I was living out of my truck. And then if you fast forward that 2 weeks later, the last words spoken to my face by my ex-wife was that I had no value and nothing to offer her or my kids. So that leads me to kind of the major shift within my journey and where the new chapter started, because that night I drove to an old deer blind and I attempted to take my life. And whatever variables were at play that night, I woke up the next morning. And the thing was I was so on autopilot, numb and out of it, that when I woke up, I walked back to my truck and I still had a job. So that was about the only thing I had going. Got in my truck, drove to work. I acted like nothing had happened. And I happened to turn on a podcast. And it was a hunting based podcast that I listened to like religiously every week. Every week it was a hunting based theme. This week it just happened to be a stoic philosophy based episode with the author Ryan Holiday. And he karate chopped those words that my ex-wife spoke to me, smacked me in the face with the Marcus Aurelius quote about adversity.
Mm-hmm.
being the opportunity to really showcase who you truly are inside. And that jumped out at me. I was like, if I sit here and I act like this is terminal and I just wait to die, then she's right. And the people that matter most to me, my kids, remember me for that. However, if I rebuild myself and my life, my kids will learn that not only was our father resilient enough to do this, but we can go through these life-changing, shattering events and we can come out on top. Reality for me after that whole event is not the context that most people call a normal way of life. I mean, before then there was obviously working 9 to 5, coming home, hanging out with the family, watching TV, eating a bowl of ice cream. Those things don't compute with me anymore. It's weird. I get like the biggest anxiety attack just by trying to sit on a couch and turn on a TV. I can't do it. And, the whole thing here is that when you're in a context of a shifting reality, finding that one little spark that you can put into a Tinder bundle, per se, in your mind, and then you start to breathe into it, that little ember is going to flare up and ignite. It's going to become a fire and it's going to light a new reality. Yeah, it's hard. It's scary. To get back to the anxiety and the depression of that stage, man, I'd go weeks without eating because I couldn't just decide what drive through to go through or what to order, what to eat. I couldn't do it.
Right.
And I think when you go from that kind of a moment where everything is so overwhelming, you can't fathom which direction to go, to finally being able to put a foot on the ground, because that foot on the ground for me was throwing my boat in the back of my truck and launching it, going and spending a day on the water. That was the first thing in this new reality that I actually did for myself with my firm decision. And I feel like that was like the launching point, the casting point.
Mm.
Because to think about not only where I was at the beginning of this chapter, but even all the chapters before, that ultimate form of redemption that I've mentioned a few times, I never could have done without going through all of that adversity. So yeah, as much as it sucked, I learned to embrace that suck of it all. And there's a line from Marcus Aurelius that I've actually written. Oh, there's a couple, but this is one that really applies. It's written in my truck, which is where he's talking to himself. It's so horrible that all these things are happening to me. And then he goes, no, it's not horrible. In fact, I'm glad these things are happening because nobody could endure them without the suffering or without the pain that I'm not experiencing. Yeah, they still hurt, but nobody's going to get through it without the grace and the ability to launch themselves forward the way that you will.
Mm. It's beautiful. It's I mean, it's definitely a tough journey, but it sort of brings up that whole attachment piece where we're attaching our self-worth to.
Yes.
So for me, that's a theme that I sort of talk to some other men about, which, it's interestingly, yesterday I had a conversation with a guy who who had a confrontation with his wife and thought that she was going to leave. And he found himself standing on a balcony in his house, ready to just throw himself off the top of the balcony because he thought he didn't have a life without them. And it's that constant piece about if we are handing out our self-worth to our job, our partners, our children, and everyone else around us, as soon as they go, I'm taking it, then you're allowing them to take that part away from you. And so you no longer owning that piece of self-worth, or you're no longer owning who you are and the value that you're bringing to the table and the purpose that you've got here, on the planet and what you can do. So I think that's one of the key messages for me when I'm having these conversations with anybody is, how are you defining your self-worth, and where have you, I suppose, where have you put the little stakes in the ground? Where have you put the little hooks of that self-worth? And how many of those are outside of you versus how much of that is actually already within you that you can actually tap into?
And I think about that, that kind of a story and that experience. And I think about today at my day job, because I've been hearing about this promotion that I'm supposed to get for like 6 months, right? And we had this conversation today that everybody's jaw was kind of on the floor with my response. And it was kind of like hung over my head, kind of like, well, you might not get it because of this or because of that. And instead of getting upset or, trying to say, oh, well, I do this, I do that. Instead, my response was, I didn't have that promotion when I walked in the door today. That promotion is not guaranteed tomorrow. So how is that really affecting or changing my life? And I think that it's something that a lot of us really lose touch with, that security. And it gets back to that whole like self-worth thing. I'm going to do what I do every day, regardless whether that promotion is there, because I'm sure not walking in begging for it. I'm, putting the results forward.
Mm.
And, that's another tricky part sometimes, is the fact that we are really caught up in such a results based world now,
Yeah.
that value is attached to that. It's attached to how much production we get done. Do we have a wife and kids? Do we have a house? What kind of car do I drive? All these things that can just at the snap of a finger be taken away from you. And I've experienced that. And I realized that, that self-value isn't those production numbers or the things that you surround yourself with. It's how you can look in the mirror and how you move through moment to moment in a way that it it vocalizes the value system that you live by. How does it touch your soul? How does it make your heart feel? You know, with the promotion, for example, if I got it, yeah, I'd be excited. I'd be elated because, it kind of frees up a little bit of other stuff, provides a little bit more and all that stuff. Great. However, the reality of it is right here in this moment, I'm still living the exact same way that I am, and that doesn't change regardless of if that promotion, that title comes along or not, because I'm still expressing that value system that I've discovered, that I've built internally.
Mm. And the other question that comes with that is, what potentially would you be giving up to get the A promotion? For example, sometimes
Yes.
promotion means more money, but it also means more expectations and a whole lot of things. And so in our society, we're trained to go, you need to become the CEO, the chief financial officer, like you need to get up to the top of the tree and everything else. But I suppose where I'm getting to on that is, what are we willing to sacrifice for that? Because what are we giving up? How aligned is that to our values? How much does that allow us to continue to do the thing that we truly love? And so, to your point, if you got the promotion, there's also a conversation about, would you accept the promotion?
Yes.
If that meant less time, being able to get outdoors, if that meant less time with your family, if that meant less time doing the things that you now truly value, that that you're truly aligned to. And so that's the other question. Yes, it might be nice to get the extra money, but again, what's that going to buy you? Because history will show that the more money you make, all you're going to do is increase your spending level based on your salary level. So the style of clothing you buy, you could have got away with a $50 pair of pants, but now you're going to buy the $100 pair of pants because now I've got the extra money coming in the door. There's still a pair of pants. And they're probably still serving the same purpose. And so a lot of people then, all they do is increase the spend rate and the brands that they're using and everything else to align with this new money coming in. And now they've redefined themselves at a different level. And then they're like, well, I need another promotion. And they get caught in the circular. And so I suppose that's the challenge that sits with people out there is where do you just go, I'm okay here. And it's okay to be okay here doing what I'm doing, living my life, because it's bringing all the value I needed to have for me to live a very happy life.
And I think that's why, my response left a lot of jaws on the ground, because you get caught up in that circle. But when that happens, you lose that balance within your very own personal circle. And, a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. They're not comfortable looking at that circle. So it does kind of make you feel a little bit different, because I know when I walked out of the room, I was kind of like, did that really just happen? Did that conversation just happened, where here I've worked myself into a position by my results, putting this, on the table. And then because I live by my value system to keep my personal circle in line, because that is more important to me than anything else, you're trying to take away something that you haven't even given me. And then your jaws on the ground, because I'm telling you, I could care less whether or not you take something that I don't have away from me. And it kind of carried on a little bit afterward in a personal conversation where I kind of shared a little bit of a story from Epictetus about how, he had this valuable lamp. And one day that lamp was stolen. And then somebody looked at him and said, hey, that lamp's gone. Are you upset? No, not really. I'm going to go buy a cheaper lamp so that next time it gets stolen, I'm even less upset. And I feel like that's kind of where I'm living life nowadays, is maybe by the skin of my teeth. And, those things that a lot of people say, hey, I can get those big high price value things. So what? I don't really care. I've got the simple things. And it reminds me a lot of, the way the 19th century, the early 1900s and whatnot were around here in America. A very simple way of life. They hadn't gotten all the advancements yet, so they had to really put their feet on the ground and do things to have. And what they had, they truly valued. And that's where I feel like I identify a lot more with. I feel like there's a lot of that more old-fashioned value, as opposed to before all that happened. I had the big TV, whatever, and break. Here's, let's go buy another one. Now it's kind of like, man, that means a little bit more.
Yeah. I think there is definitely something about, when they have that term of, I put my heart and soul into it, so a lot of the material items we get, they're just a transaction. And so there's no heart and soul in it, because the view is that we probably see them mass produced somewhere else. And, we don't have a connection to what that was. But as you said, back in the early 1900s, there was heart and soul, because you were collecting the timber, you were doing the design, you were pulling, basically your, blood, sweat, and tears were actually then embedded within the woodwork and the framework and everything that you were then living in, and how you were living, and the table you were eating off. And so there is a lot to be said, I think, at the moment about the world of disconnection that we're now living in, because people are so far disconnected from, even a simple thing, asking a kid that lives in the city, like, where's their steak come from? Like, where does their milk come from? And they're like, well, that's from the butcher. It's from this. And they don't even have that connection that was a live animal that actually was brought up and grazed and everything else, that is now provided, had its life sacrificed for you to have food. There's so much disconnection, I think, in society now, which I feel is contributing a bit to where, my view is that we have a sick society from a mental health point of view. And I think there's that disconnection is really contributing to that. Your thoughts?
It really is. It's one of those things where I can say that I've lived it firsthand because, with my depression, my anxiety, for many years, I threw a mask over it. I disconnected, covered it up with alcohol or whatever I could because, hey man, it's too hard to deal with. That stuff sucks. That stuff's scary. And then, you get to a point where you kind of end up having to face it. I guess you hit rock bottom. And being on both ends of it now where I'm at, I look at it and I see a lot of that. Not only from my time that I spend in the field and, hunting, fishing and everything like that, processing my own food, but really the mindful aspect of it. And there's a lot that goes into that. Like, I know I kind of get a lot of flack sometimes because I don't post a lot of the grip and grins when I'm out hunting. I'll share the story, I'll share the meat with you, whatever. But there's something spiritual and there's some kind of connection there that it doesn't really thrill me to take the picture with the animal after the fact. If I get a picture while it's alive, great. If not, then there's that connection that I feel like I can't stop the soul by taking a picture. I can't dishonor the animal. And, from there we go through, we process it, and we use it at every aspect of that animal that we possibly can. Nothing goes to waste. And that's something that, again, that drastic shift in life has really changed because that term, nothing goes to waste, yeah, it's always been there with hunting, but it wasn't there in life. It was always, okay, that served its purpose, throw it out, get something new. Now it's, let's refashion whatever I can find. And those smaller, simpler things really lead to that connection. And one way that I've really taken to that on the mental health level is through meditation. And that was one of those things that I stumbled into where it was suggested to me in a counseling session. And I laughed it off. I'm like, the stereotypes with it. Buddhist monk, bald guy. That's stupid. That is not me. That is not like a thing that I'm going to put myself into. Then I go out back, I pick up my bow, and I'm like, slow breathing, slow thought, meditation. Do that here and there. I'm out in the field. I'm hunting, sitting still. The stillness, the slow thoughts come back, the breathing, the attachment, the connection. I'm meditating. I can bring that home. And whether I'm sitting in this deer blind right now and I'm meditating, or I'm in a house, I'm in a truck, wherever it is, anytime those feelings of depression, anxiety, overwhelming come up, I got that ability now. I can start slowing my breathing. I can start to focus and actually channel those thoughts to connect and, process and calm down. And that's something I love teaching people.
I love what you've just spoken into, and there's a couple of elements in there which I do like in. And I was actually going to ask you a question, but you went there first, which is awesome. So you are Project Mindfully Outdoors, which I really, really love and I love the fact of how you talked into there's a perception, well, particularly like I'm plant-based, right? So yeah, there's perceptions in different groups, but it's the trophy hunter image that you often see, which is just, look at what I've done and everything else. And I like how you've gone with the view of, that animal that, you've gone out and hunted has a soul and is actually then, has a connection point, and there's dishonor in seeing it as a non-connected creature, whereas this creature is part of the ecosystem. It is part of the energy source on the earth that we live. And by honoring that animal, by saying, yeah, look, taking a photo before you shoot of a beautiful deer or what happens to be is amazing, because these are beautiful creatures. But then going through the honoring process afterwards, I think is hugely powerful, and I think that's a great message for a lot of people. I've got friends who are hunters, and they know that, again, it's not something that I'm in favor of, but I do have a conversation with them about it's what you do after it. It's the gratitude, it's the process, it's the acknowledgement, which all Indigenous people, all tribes, Indigenous tribes around the world have always had that practice of saying thanks and giving gratitude back to that animal and back to the gods for providing that animal to feed the tribe and feed the community. So I love that aspect. And then the other one is exactly how simplistically you describe meditation. Because I'll have conversations with people and go, I can't meditate. I don't know how to do it. And it's sort of like, have you ever just done this? Exactly like, have you ever just been out surfing? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And if you just sit out the back and just watching waves going, yeah, well, guess what? You've meditated. Like, what are you saying? Well, you're sitting out there, you're cool, your breath's under control, it's nice and calm, you've connected with the water, you're obviously watching for the next wave, and there's nothing happening in your mind except for just being out there. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, there you go. That's meditation. And it's reframing this thing of, yes, the Buddhist monk, sitting down for 8 hours of not having any thoughts in their mind. It's not reality. That does happen, but certainly there's many, many ways of meditating and many forms of meditation that, playing a musical instrument for me is meditation. Learning to play a musical instrument is meditation, because you have to be present with the instrument. You have to be listening to the sound that's coming out of that instrument as you're playing it. Is it flat? Is it sharp? Is it not quite there? Did you make a little mistake? And you're really connected. And as long as you are in a state of coming from willingness to learn and not, I suppose, beating yourself up if you're making mistakes, then it can actually be a very nice, pleasant meditative practice. You go, oh my God, an hour's just gone by. That was really cool. And so, yeah, there's definitely ways that we can reframe what's happening in society around us.
There's a hunting slogan that goes, aim small so you miss small, right? Well, I think a lot of the disconnect comes from looking at a big picture. I want to get from point A to point B, and it's all the way over there. Well, what if you take and you add steps? You break that into small little chunks. So instead of from A to B being like a 5 mile jump, A to B is however far your footstep is, then B to C. And I think that when you start to do that, you start to really become present, because you're starting to see that space in that moment. And that idea of beating ourselves up is because we're so oriented on, I'm learning a musical instrument, I got to do this right. There's no room for failure, because you're set on being here at A and jumping to B. If you walk a little, footstep, you take it pace by pace. And that's what I had to do. I went from that rear view mirror and saying, I want to be way over here. I don't want to be homeless and living in my truck, trying to sleep at my favorite fishing spot. I want to be over there somewhere where it's comfortable and I'm happy. But if I take that big giant leap, there's no room for failure. There's no room to learn or progress. So if I start trucking step by step, I hit that mile marker, I see a little shift in the compass. Ultimately, you discover, that magnet that pulls you north toward the goal. And that's one of the biggest things that I'd like to share with people is when you're sitting at home or, whatever it is, take the time to go outside and just take a walk, because the more you get out and you start moving, you start to realize that there's a lot of things in the world that are holding you back that aren't so scary. A lot of people look at the wilderness as an intimidating space, like there's a lot of opportunities out there to die or get hurt. And as you start to go out and you start to walk, you realize, and there's not a grizzly bear around every single corner waiting to rip my face off. There's not a rock ledge that I'm going to trip and fall over and die. I'm enjoying this stuff. I'm able to connect with myself. And one of the things that I love sharing and that's really been powerful and motivational to me is literally Mother Nature, and the fact that every single being, thing, element on this earth is here without a story. There's no biased story. There's nothing going on except for whatever it has to do to live. And when I can go out and I can look at that, and I can take you back to the height of the rut season, it, in the deer season this year. I'm struggling around that time. I'm struggling with my anxiety and this event that I had to come up. I'm like, man, I don't want to do this. I'm going to die if I go here. And I'm sitting in the tree blind, and here come this beautiful young buck. Nice big rack. I'd never seen him before. Now, I frequent the area, but he was new to me. And if I don't have a connection with a deer, I'm not gonna take him. So I let him I let him go. I gave him a pass, and it was cold that day. I mean, it was bone chilling cold. So I'm sitting there going, man, I call myself a hunter. I'm sitting up here in this tree. I'm not shooting that deer. What am I doing? And I'm thinking, and I'm like, wait a minute. That deer, by his place in the scheme of things, is on the menu for not only me, but every predator in the world. And it is 12 o'clock in the afternoon. He should be hiding. However, it's the rut. He's got a mission to do. He's got to further his species, life or death. So yeah, in the back of his head, he's probably like, man, I'm stupid right now. I'm out here. I could get shot. I could die, but it doesn't matter. I got a job to do. So if he can trust in himself and knowing that a situation comes up, if he had heard me, he could bolt off, or see a predator, he can do what he's got to do, that he's going to get that mission done. Why am I so afraid of this story that I'm telling myself that I've got to get up in front of 300 people and talk about anxiety and depression? Why is it blocking me? Why can't I get up there and just do that job?
Wow, super powerful. Um, from my very spiritual side of the world, will say that that buck was put in front of you, as you said, you hadn't seen it before. That was deliberately, the universe said, we're going to present you with this gift and this challenge, and and leave you with an opportunity to come out. So I think that's a really powerful story about the fact that that's what took place. So how'd you go? You jumped up in front of the 300 people and you had the conversation?
I survived. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful celebration, is what it wound up being, to be honest with you. I thought I was prepared. I thought I had everything ready to go. And as soon as I got up on stage, of course, that little thing came up. So I wound up sharing that story. And you know what? From there, it was wonderful. The reception, the responses, and everything. It was amazing.
I've heard someone say this before. I think they had to do a TEDx talk, and they were getting very nervous and anxious about having to stand up to do this, and as a person beside them sort of said, "Oh, how you going?" And going, "Oh, I'm really, really nervous." And they go, "Why?" "Well, I'm up next, and we've had all these fantastic speakers." And the one thing that this person said to him was, "Everybody in this room is rooting for you. No one's here to see you fail, and no one is going to know that it's a failure. Everyone here is to support you in doing what you're doing." And so, similar with you doing your standing up in front of that 300, there wouldn't have been one person going, "Oh, geez, I can't wait to see this guy screw this up." It wouldn't have made any difference because they're all there supporting you, knowing that you've had that courage to stand up in front of those 300 people and share your stories. And I think that's what we're going to keep reminding ourselves, that people aren't out there to see us fail. People actually fundamentally want us to all to succeed and to be successful. And that the people in the audience, when we're speaking or doing the podcast, actually they love it and they want it to hear the story. And it doesn't matter how imperfectly perfect or how perfectly imperfect it happens to be. It is just, that's what it is. And everyone will be there just giving us that support because they're going, "Yeah, thanks for doing that for us." It didn't matter whether it was spot on or glitchy or whatever else, but the fact is the more about the messages we're putting out as opposed to, the other aspects that go with it. So if I find that, I like to tap back into that as well to go, yeah, it's here to be supportive as opposed to, being critiqued.
Absolutely. I think, it comes down to that, just accepting
Mm.
ourselves for who we are and just letting the journey go one moment at a time, one simple word at a time. There is, I think, really the definition of failure is kind of something we tell ourselves. And, I get back to how Seneca, in my mind, said it the best, that we suffer more internally within our own thoughts than what reality has for any of us. So, you can tell yourself, man, I'm going to walk up there and they're all going to laugh at me. I'm going to fall on my face. I'm not going to be able to talk. But the truth is, you get up and you do it, and it's going to be great.
Absolutely. I've just noticed that we've clocked on to, nearing the hour here. So you've definitely been very generous with your time and it's been an awesome conversation, Mike. Is there and there's so many things that we didn't really get into, which I would love to. So maybe we need to plan another catch up a little bit later on to continue to explore. But is there a message or a summation or something that you would like to put out to, men who, may have been down a similar path to you or are currently sitting in their truck and they found that podcast or they found this podcast and this is the episode they're going to listen to? Is there a message that you would give out to men to go, part of your journey?
I think Daniel Boone said it best. I've never truly been lost. Sure, I've been bewildered and turned around in the woods for 3 days, but I was never truly lost because, you know, regardless of what higher power you believe in, we weren't created to fail. And we mentioned that earlier, that everything is in our favor. It's a matter of being present, stepping into the role, relinquishing yourself to that role, and allowing yourself the space to go forward. And you need to give yourself that grace to accept, whether it's a good moment, a bad moment, mistakes happen, you can always go back and you can redeem those mistakes.
Man, I love that. Thank you very much. I think that's exactly right. We're never truly lost. We just sometimes, we might feel we're lost, but there is always a path available for us, and we just got to, find that path and get back on it. So, thanks, Mike. Again, I was looking forward for us to be able to have this chat to flip around. It's been great having you as a guest on the podcast. I'd like to wish you all the best for Project Mindfully Outdoors. I'm seeing all the great work you're doing. I'm seeing that, you're influencing so many people. I can see so many people being aligned to your message. And I think if you just keep doing what you're doing, there's your purpose. And it's only going to keep growing from here. So thank you. And have an awesome night over where you are at the moment in your deer blind.
Well, you know what? I'm grateful for the opportunity. I love the fact we got together to celebrate my work this time. We definitely got to do a part 2 for my show, and maybe we can get together and do a second year.
Sounds good. I think it'll be great. All right, mate. Have a great evening where you are over there, and we'll chat again soon. Have a great one. Cheers. Bye.
All right. You too. Talk to you soon.
So how good was that with Mike? Just having a bit of a chat about his journey and where he's been on. Just picture in your mind what it'd be like. You're just sitting in your truck. That's it. That's your life. And you've got choices to make. How do you move forward, or do you go backwards? And clearly Mike, has by no means has been an easy path for him, but he keeps stepping up every day and stepping up every day and stepping up every day, and that's the key. Take that aligned action every single day. I love the story, and I also love how mindful he is about hunting and everything else. As people know, it's not definitely in alignment with myself, but that's not going to stop me having conversations with beautiful people who, are out there doing amazing things. And as you said, they use every part of the animal as possible. And I'm extremely grateful for people like Mike who are doing, hunting in a very conscious manner. So I think that's about it. We'll probably wrap up there. As you said, you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Or just look up stephenmilverton.com and you'll find my website. But apart from that, it's been an awesome chat with Mike, and wrapping up episode 64 of the Unearthed Man podcast. Sending you much love, care, and peace, Stephen.